tell you, one of the things is some of us things, the subjects we did not deal with growing up or even now and through the years. Subjects that we should have dealt with, that it's almost like during that hour of service we hoped that we didn't have to talk about it, and I think we have failed in not addressing honesty because somehow people had the idea, well, if they're saved, they should never do that, or they should never think that way, or they should never act that way. That's immaturity because we are not understanding the wickedness of the old nature that's still among us. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, there's especially one or two things that I want to address. And I'd like for you to share your thoughts with us. And I would maybe share some personal experiences. One of the things that when you have to quit being honest, you don't need to be in the pulpit. You know, if you have to be put on, or he used to always tell me, he said, well, get up there, smile, and act wonderful when you're not. And I said, that's hard to do. I can't smile all the time. I mean, sometimes I wouldn't make a good poker player. But Paul's writing to the church of Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. And I will take these glasses off to read. Ain't that something? Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Here it is. Open your hearts to us. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have cheated no one. I do not say this to condemn, for I have said before that you are in our hearts to die together and live together. Great is my boldness of speech towards you. Great is my boasting on your behalf. I am filled with comfort. I am exceedingly joyful in our tribulation. A lot of people today say that if you're joyful in the Lord, you're not going to have tribulation. If you're blessed, you're not going to be stressed. For indeed, when we came to Macedonia, our bodies had no rest. They were wore out, physically fatigued. But we were troubled on every side. Mercy. Outside were conflicts. Inside were fears. I can identify. Nevertheless, God, who comforts thee, and however you use that word, the word is depressed. It's what it is. Comforted us by the coming of Titus. And we'll stop there. We have certain subjects that many times need to be addressed. And it's not addressed because we're so afraid, well, what do they think of us? Well, what will they think of me? When I get to know somebody, brother and sister in Christ, and we begin to share, and we begin to talk, there are certain people you can trust and there are certain people you cannot. There are certain people that I know through the years. I put it in the Spartanburg Herald Journal before I tell them. Today I put it on the internet before I would tell them because everybody's going to know. But I'm encouraged by people like Simon Peter in the Scripture who had failures, and even in Paul who admits. And most people are going to come into town in Macedonia and say, I'm not tired, I'm not worried, I'm not weak, I'm not feeble. He's telling the truth. They're wore out. They've been persecuted. They've been from one jail to the next. They're going through trials. They're fearful. And I sometimes look at my life, and you probably do, and say, am I the only one? Do other people have the fears and the nervousness and the anxiety things that I have? And they probably do. But sometimes I would like to trade mine for other people's. But they'd probably do the same. I'm not sure. Paul is speaking of the joy in Jesus, and yet he's speaking of the honesty that he deals with in Romans chapter 7 when he talks about the old nature compared to the new. But he's talking about the trials that he faces, the struggles, not just him, but the people that were with him. Said when we came to Macedonia, they were together, they were a team. Our bodies had no rest. We couldn't find any rest. We couldn't find relief. But we were troubled on every side. Without were fightings, conflicts, inside or within were fears. When fears hit you the hardest, it's hard to say. things. What do you think it is? And we'll get to that. Paul is really bragging and talking about the people that have supported him, that they watched over him, and even God who comforts the depressed, the downcast, comfort us by the coming of Titus. And what I talk about friendship, when you can find somebody that you can share with and talk with. And it's not one-sided, they're sitting there nodding their head because they don't have any problems and they're listening to all yours. It's kind of a back and forth. We almost get in an argument who's the weakest. You'd be surprised. Now today it's a little different. With some of the younger ones it's a little different today. But years ago, growing up among pastors, the ones that I knew that didn't put on a big front, like some of them do, I guess, but we would get together and you'd be surprised what we would talk about. You'd be surprised what we would share. You'd be what we could share. And now if there's somebody come up that was itching to hear it and tell it, we'd stop. But as long as it was in that inner circle, we could share our faults and our weaknesses with each other. And to be honest with you, we didn't go all on gloom and doom. We felt a lot better. We felt like, man, I'm not in this alone. I'm not just going through this by myself. But somehow in the church, we have painted a picture through the years that everybody comes in with a smile on their face. Everybody's happy. Everybody's feeling good but me. Everybody's had good feelings but me. And there's a song I used to sing, I'm feeling mighty fine, 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 fine. And I wanted to stand up and say, well, I'm not. And I'm preaching some of the time. But whoopee-doo, what no feelings are you worth? Sometimes you're the toughest enemy. They don't last very long. Somebody one time said there's not many green lights in the Christian life. There's a good many red lights, but there's a lot of yellow lights. There's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of unknown. Paul is coming and letting people know, hey, if I'm tired, I need somewhere to rest. I need somewhere to sleep. And my niece is having surgery when she was a little baby, about 3, a baby, about 4 years old. That sense of humor we got, I guess. And we was in a restaurant, and the waitress came out and said, y'all be needing silverware. And my niece said, duh. Duh. I'm like, yeah. Wait a minute. You don't even have to ask that question. But to ask if people have a need, it used to always tickle me. Preachers, we say some of the things, and I get tickled when preachers say, if you're here today, and perhaps you're here today, or you might be here today, and we're standing there out there in the congregation, but I know what they say. I hear that if you might be here today, or you could be here today, or perhaps you're here today, but when we stand up and say, if you have a need, if you're breathing, you have a need, that question is answered. But what we have done sometimes is people are afraid to open up. And I can understand why sometimes what people might say. But many times we don't find that relief. We don't find that comfort. We don't find that light person that we can share with. And some things only the Lord can do. And then as a believer, an unbeliever is not going to understand about the two natures. They're not going to know, well, how are you struggling with those two natures? They don't have but one. But yet, those of us who have the two natures that are born again, we understand that the flesh is weak. And I think sometimes it's just the wickedness of the flesh, the weakness of the flesh, that this is enmity, it's against the new nature. And many times we're afraid to acknowledge, but Paul I like it. He absolutely comes into town, and today we would say, boy, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited about being here. I've rested comfortably. I don't have a fear in my name. Financially, I'm doing wonderful. I feel fine, lying like a dog. But Paul, and he's not being negative. He's not down on himself. He's being honest. But we shouldn't say that. We shouldn't talk like that. There was a preacher, I can't remember exactly how it went, but he was in a revival, and he just started opening up immediately like he had known him for years. And everybody we just going to have a great revival, and I'm here to preach. He was being honest, but I tell you, the last couple, 3 weeks, I've just felt I've had problem after problem, trial after trial, might have difficulties and you might have problems that I don't. I'm going to run from people like that. Because first of all, they're lying. Unless they're not saved and they don't have an enemy, then they might not be going through. But if they've got the old and the new nature, then they're going to have problems. They're going to have difficulties. But don't we sometimes look and say, I might have problems, but not as bad as those folks. I wouldn't never. You ever said that? I wouldn't. I can't believe they do that. I can't believe they've said that. I can't believe they admit that. I've had problems going through my legalism through the years that I did. And didn't learn, and it's amazing how the Lord used basic little things to break you. I won't go into it. But he did, it's amazing how he would break you and humble you, and it brought humility to me. And being critical and somewhat legalistic, going through it and not staying in it, he would remind me. And I think of a train going by at Grand Poplar every time I hear a train. And what I'm going to get at is that Paul is coming into town, and on a day somebody would listen to Paul, and Paul would have finished that verse 4 and 5 and 6, and they would have had a meeting with him at the church. Paul, you've come into town, and you're here for revival services, and we've got a place for you, but you're just not who we're looking for. You're too down on yourself. You're coming here and you've opened up, and now you've just admitted you're weak, you admitted you're tired, and we're really looking for somebody that's got it together. We're really looking for somebody that knows 2 and 2's 4, that they're able just to come in and cheer us up and put us down. And Paul would leave so distraught today, he probably, I don't know where he'd go. But he's already going to jail. How worse can you get? But he said, I'm still filled with comfort. I'm exceedingly joyful in the midst of it. A lot of people think it's in the midst of the absence of it. But the Bible doesn't tell that. It's in the midst of it. Don't mean it's gloom and doom. And you want good things to happen. I ask the Lord all the time for good, pleasant surprises, for some good things to happen. You would get together with some of us guys through the preachers, and you would listen to us on a Monday morning or any other morning. And you'd think we was the most down and out people on the face of this earth. But we are able to just share and hash back and forth and we talk about some of the same things. What good is it going to do if I wanted to borrow $5,000 from the bank in Landrum, and I knew the guy at Landrum, and I walked in there and I needed the money desperately. And he said, Keith, come on in here. And I said, I've been looking forward to this meeting. I set it up last week and said, he said, well, what can I do for you? He said, I just wanted to ask you questions about the banker business. He said, I just want to know tell me what you do. And I'd lie like a dog. He's going to look at me after about 10 minutes and say, Keith, what do you need? And I'm going to finally tell him, I need to borrow some money. He said, why didn't you say that to start with? And I'll sometimes wonder, why didn't we say that to start with? I want to ask you the question. Why have we been so reluctant through the years? But now we're having to cover issues that we thought we'd never cover. But why have we been so reluctant to not deal with certain issues in the church? Why do you think? And there's no wrong answers.
Embarrassment, stigma.
Yeah, what will people think? And embarrassment, like coming forward to the altar. Preacher was talking about a fella was in his church, and he had got away from the Lord, and said that the guy had decided that Saturday night that he was coming forward to apologize to the Lord. He'd already asked the Lord to forgive him and come back home, and he knew better, and he said he's going to ask the Lord to ask the people to forgive him. He said, there ain't nothing going to stop me. And said that morning, he didn't know what the preacher was going to preach on. And he and his wife came in and said, he had already determined to go to the altar and go to the front and talk to the church. And the preacher preached for 35 minutes on adultery. He said, I waited on that Saturday. But what's another reason that you think we've not, is it the status that they would think I'm less of a Christian? What's the reasoning? we think those are not for believers. There's some that do. And I hear these things, even songs that I disagree with that. That we do worry, we do get depressed, we do get discouraged, we do get despondent, dejected at times. We don't have to stay that way, but really until we get to heaven, we're going to be that. That's going to be a part of us. That don't end when we get saved. That don't end when we reach a spiritual maturity. So any other reasons we have not dealt with some of these subjects? Especially a pastor, a leader, being able to, we think in, like Paul in chapter 7 of Romans, he's speaking about before he got saved. No, he's not. He's speaking about after he was saved and the struggles he went through. See, we're wanting to hear, and that's been a question I think I asked, not here I don't think, maybe. They may have. What happens when somebody's out in the world and they're lost and they get saved? Boy, we've got to start. No matter sin is sin, and we're one beggar telling another beggar how to find bread. But they come to the Lord and we got a new life, a new start. But what happens when years go by, weeks go by, months go by, and that person falls by the wayside? And that person falls back into sin. Still sin, but you know what I mean, falls back into sin. Well, are we going to tell them we need to get saved again, which is not so? If they're genuinely born again, we've never covered that. It's almost like a one and done. You get saved and you better perform well. You better not mess up. You better not goof up. You better not struggle. You know, I wish I'd have been married. I miss that. Had a lot to do with being a preacher, I guess, a poor, small town. But I never could understand it. You had to be married to be a preacher. But if your wife left you, you couldn't preach no more. And I couldn't ever, what in the world is that all about? But anyway, the idea of people, and I've had people, well, that's where the embarrassment comes in. That's where the struggle. Somebody that's been, they don't have to tell what it is. People say, well, I didn't ever know that, or why did, you were saved, you ought to know better than this. A lot of people will say, come back to know they came and say they never got saved. But I think some are. I think many are, and they just want to deny responsibility. But we've not covered that issue. Oh, yeah, when they get saved, we're glad to win them to the Lord and see them saved and send them on their way, and don't lie to them. But send them on their way and tell them in about 5 minutes it'll hit you. If it don't in 5 months, you better come back and talk to me again, because you done got a bad dose of legalism if you don't see sin and struggles. But after that, and they come to know the Lord, it's literally like we're under the most tremendous pressure known to man. You better not slip up. You better not fail. You better not sin, because if you do, you're done. See, that's the attitude in Hebrews. That's why it's not, the writer of Hebrews is not telling you can lose your salvation. Because if he is and he's not, whoever wrote the book of Hebrews, if they lose their salvation, they cannot be saved again. They're done. They're toast. And so that's not what it's talking about. You can't lose your salvation. We didn't earn it to start with. But Paul is the ones that deals with when we have struggle, when we have sin. We may not even be sinning. We may be going through some things, and it's because we are faithful to the Lord, not unfaithful. And that may be the confusion. People say, well, what if I was to stand up and say I'm going through discouragement or going through depression? What would they think of me? They won't have as much confidence in me, but not really. What about in verse number 6? Or verse 6, verse 6. When God, nevertheless God, who comforts the depressed. The D words: depressed, discouraged, rejected, despondent. I've heard somebody preach on that. How easy is it to admit that you go through that? And I will tell you that I do. two natures. I think sometimes we want to look and say, I'm doing pretty good. I don't want people to know, but I'm just kind of the opposite after coming through legalism, through a little bit of the legalism I went through, and I think believers go through that, but some stay in it, sadly. Do you just feel like I'd never do that? I would never get to that point. I would never get despondent. To you, what is the difference between discouragement and dejection? Is there any difference? What's the difference between all those D words? Discouragement, despondency, dejection, which I think is my top one, is dejection. I'd say probably you put dejection up here. Depression's kind of in the lower to middle, but it does not necessarily stay there. Remorse, probably. Terms we don't want to use, but we should have. I think we would have salvaged a lot of people, and a lot of people would have been helped tremendously if we'd have known how to deal with it. Get up there and just preach. Get up there and just tell them how wonderful things are. Get up there, but don't deal with subjects. Not why. We're to teach. We're to know the Scripture. We're to know that Paul says, basically, we're not loners. How did they get comforted in this particular situation? Paul said we're comforted by the coming of Titus. We are comforted by the Lord sending us someone. The idea of not just marriage, but fellowship, brothers and sisters in Christ. Have you ever had that to happen? Where you needed that comfort and strength. Many times people depend on a minister to be there. But, I've had the question I told you. A guy asked me at the Life Church, I said, well, who do you talk to? I said, well, the Lord. And then I kind of drew a blank. I said, I don't really know who else, to be honest with you. And I get tickled when they say, well, you don't really ever go through this. Yes, I do, too. I think that is why we're success-oriented. You don't want, what if they knew that? I wouldn't get this promotion, or I wouldn't get this standing, or I wouldn't get to be this. Who cares? You need, for your own spiritual health and well-being, it's good to confess. What does the Bible say? Confess your faults to one another, that you may basically be healed. Not physically necessarily, but spiritually. It is a relief to be able to tell folks, yeah, I struggle with certain things. They don't get into some. But what do you think? What's in a weakness that you might have? How have you found if you're able to, that you've not been able to bring that out, either in a class or among believers? Why is that difficult for you that to be done? I must be gone.
Well, if you're teaching, people are expecting you to be not above them, but to know more than they know, because otherwise, why would you be teaching them?
Yeah.
So you must have it together.
Yeah. That especially goes extra for preachers and leadership that they do. And we never says that because we're basically, certainly in the church, we're not the boss. Certainly we're a leader, a pastor is, but they're not the boss mentality. They're not above people. We are kind of really on the same level, because there's many times I could sit down and listen to somebody else, and there's times I've needed to probably. As a pastor, to be honest with you, growing up the way I grew up, easygoing, real informal, nutty, cut up, quiet, it has been difficult for me. It has been a thorn in the side for me to act like a preacher, to be honest with you. And I'm not talking about being a put on, but I've had so many people, well, you need to act this way. I never got that memo. And I guess that's why I've been alone on the totem pole over the years. I just never have that's not biblical. Oh, the pastor is so holy and sanctimonious and righteous. No, we're not. No, we're not. No, we're not. Anyway, there's things, like you say, that I would tell certain, and you would too, but you can't tell everybody. You don't just spill it all out. But I do to some people. Certainly do to the Lord. He's not surprised. And when we tell him anything, he's not surprised. But obviously, They were distressed. They were discouraged. They were tired. They were weary. They were worn down. It wasn't just one thing. It was a number of things, difficulties, but little things. This ought to tell you about the fellowship in a church. That it didn't say I saw him on TV. He didn't have it back then anyway. I was comforted by the coming of Titus. We met together. We broke bread together. We fellowshiped together. We talked together. And we would have this time, and it'd start out with about, say, 15 of us. Well, some of the guys in there were so spiritual. And so we'd get down to about 6 or 8 of us, or 7 of us, or 5 of us. We'd kind of look around, and I don't know, me or somebody, I said, all right, fellas, is it time to talk now? That they've left? Is it time to be able to be honest? And it got down to about 2 or 3 of us. And that was where you really, really were helped. But it has always been a situation with me, as you can understand as a pastor, how, man, alive. My buddy in the country music business for 30 years, 31 years. I hang around, I've worked with him some volunteer. And when he first got started, he was pretty well known. And somebody asked me one time, said, well, you hang around him and he hangs around you. Said, what do you think about reputation? I said, oh, he'll get over it. It won't hurt him too bad. And fixing to send him a text message in a minute about something. But he's going to be in Greenville somewhere, right? I got to find out if I'm going to be there. But anyway, it is, as a lot of times people always say, I came to church and didn't get nothing out of it. I didn't learn, I didn't felt worse. Well, what about sometimes a pastor? When they share and they want to share and they want to talk and you talk about times where you feel like, oh, I won't name the name, but you feel pretty bad. You feel pretty low. You feel like, man, it has drained it out of me. They always said it is like working an 8-hour day preaching a message, especially when you exert a lot of energy. Especially the old timers. They might have been working 16 hours. But sweating like a racehorse. But they weren't that personable back then. They kind of avoided the issues. They kind of acted like, that preacher, he got together. And I would even ask questions as a teenager back then. And I tell you something that got me. It bothered me, and I don't know why, because I was 13 years old at a bird supper at my uncle's basement, quail supper, Saturday night before Super Bowl, and I was 13 years old, and I didn't know the Lord was going to call me to preach. I have no idea. I would have thought that'd been the last thing, but I don't know, for some reason it bothered me, and our preacher come in on a Saturday. We just sitting around with people's overalls and just informal. He comes in with a cup and a tie. I said, fella, go home and change. And everybody was so nice to the preacher, so friendly, and how you doing, preacher, and preacher's wife. Well, he finally left. I'd have left sooner than that. He finally got up and left, and I never will forget what somebody in my family said, and it bothered me. And I didn't understand why back then. They said, I'm glad he left. And she left. Now we can have fun. Because the preacher left. And I wondered, who says that around me? I said, I'm going to make sure they have fun. And when I leave, by Greenwich, they're going to be bored. I never forgot that. And I know what people's thought was, oh, they're such a nice preacher. Like was a wuss or something. And I didn't like that. I liked it about the old preacher up in the mountains. I think I told you, he might have his daughter. I think I told somebody his daughter was in that class. I might have told us on Wednesday night. And his daughter was a pretty little girl, about the senior. And this teacher, man, got to flirting with her and wanted to ask her out. She said, no. He said, well, I'm going to fail you if you don't go out with me. Well, she went home and told her daddy. He was an old mountain preacher. He'd been rough before he got saved, and been rough and all moonshine and everything. And so finally, the daddy went and talked to the teacher. Told the teacher, said, now my daughter says that if you don't go out with her, you're going to fail her. I said, well, I'll just put it this way. I'm going to probably fail her. He said, well, I'll tell you something. If she don't do the work, you've got every right to fail her. Said, but if you fail her because she won't date you, I'm going to whoop you. And said, if you sue me, I'm going to whoop you again. Said, when I got saved, I didn't quit fighting, I just switched sides. I thought that was pretty good. A lot of people thought we'd quit the battle. But that's been a thing that's always kind of bothered me. As you go somewhere, like I told you, in a barber shop or place, and everybody knows you're a preacher, and they act nice. I got friends that act worse, and it kind of tickles me when I walk in, and I said, what are they getting there? And my preacher at the work, he did some work, carpenter work on the side years ago. He had a minor curse word one time. It took him half the day to get over it. You know, like he hit his finger and he said something that wasn't awful. But believe it or not, how could somebody like that go through? How could that be a help to somebody? Is it more of a help to you when people deny it and you're going through it, or when they tell you, I can relate, I can understand? That don't mean you're living in sin. Paul is glorifying the Lord. Paul could have skipped that subject. He could have said, I'm comforted and I have great joy. But he said, I'm comforted even in the midst of being depressed, being downcast. See, he could have slid away from that, but through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he did not. He was telling the truth. He was being honest. He was being real. I spend the whole time wondering that there's been a lot of folks that just never felt at home because they just couldn't be themselves. They couldn't be themselves. They couldn't be who they are. They couldn't be who they were. One time, said this preacher said, you'd never know him behind the scenes. I said, well, you should. Is he different? Oh, yeah, he shouldn't be. He should be who he is. He should be the same. And so I'm worried about that. I just believe that more and more people in this world today are dealing with things like this. And we have many times chosen to not do it, to not be there, I'd rather them not know. I'd rather not talk about it. They get help somewhere else. Where? They can get help somewhere else. The church should be a spiritual hospital, a place to find help. And they're asking me, my uncle, at one time had a bunch of money, but he made some decisions. He trusted people he shouldn't, and he didn't have a lot of money, not soon after that. And this man back home never got that memo. And he thought my uncle was well off, and this man was going through financial ruin, this other guy was. So he called up my uncle, and he told my uncle, said, I want you to come on, I want you to talk. I want to talk to you. My uncle said, well, I kind of know what he wants to talk about. But I went over there anyway. And this man didn't get the memo about my uncle not having money anymore. So they're sitting there and said, we sat there about an hour, and that man just cried like a baby. Just bawled and talked about how broke he was, and he was getting ready to go through bankruptcy, and how awful that was, how difficult that was. And somebody asked my uncle, said, well, what did you do? He said, I sat there and cried. Because I was in the same boat he was. I was as needful as he was, and we were out of luck. We just two of us that were broke, and we wondered who else to go to. Where can you go to the Lord? Where you can talk to the Lord about it. But why didn't Paul just say that? Lord, you're enough. You are enough. But I talked to you about it. I don't need anybody. He didn't say that. He said, Lord, who comforted us by the coming of Titus. There was a particular specific person that was there. And that will bother you in one way or the other. Because with me, the longer you get to know me, you realize why. But anyway, people have always asked me, said, but I'm talking about, well, not almost getting married, we didn't have that. Then it didn't work out. But I wanted it to twice, once especially. Both times it had to do with being a preacher. Did God have somebody for me? Yeah. Did I miss her? Yeah, I missed her. Somehow or another, I don't think there was, I can't go there's not a day goes by that I don't. There's not a day goes by that will hit me, whether it don't matter what time it is, what day it is, what hour it is. I don't know for sure, but I don't know who she would have been. But somewhere along the line, it was not meant for me to be alone. And the Bible says that, and yet some people are. And I can understand that. Paul himself, I believe, was married. His wife died, I believe. And because he had to be married to be in the Sanhedrin. That's where the Baptists get the idea you got to have a wife, is from the Sanhedrin. Because Paul could not have been in the Sanhedrin as an unbeliever if he was not married. They wouldn't allow him. So that's not even questionable. So his wife probably passed away. Couldn't have left him. But for me personally, and especially when you get in a meeting, see, I'm opening up. Y'all need to do that too. And you're sitting there and you're the only one there that ain't got a wife. And somebody undoubtedly, well, there, I'll tell you what, God meant for us to have a wife. I'm glad I got a wife. Probably the only time he's bragged on her all month. But anyway, he sits there and brags about his wife knowing I'm married. And so a fellow at seminary one time, bless his heart, good guy, kind of a little older. And he said, my wife is beautiful. I said, well, you overmarried then. And anyway, he said, don't you be flirting with her because she's married and she's a beaut. And said, Keith, if you'll pray, God will send you somebody like my wife. She walked through the door. I quit praying about it for about a year and a half. Just kidding you. I'm just kidding you. Woo! Lord mercy. I'm just kidding. But he did say that showing up, but I wasn't making fun of his wife. I joked about the last of it. Other things is, see, a lot of people think there's something that's bothering you, and it might be the thing. Well, I remember that happened to them, and it's bothering them. And that might not be what bothers people. See, Paul had a thorn in the flesh. It didn't leave him. And so that thorn in the flesh doesn't go away. It may be more than one. They may say, well, I know this happened to that person, and that's why it may not be that. It may be something that somebody doesn't even know. Not being able to pastor a big church and make a lot of money has never bothered me. Never being in a big church has never bothered me. I'm not there. That's not my desire. Being able to get a doctorate was never my desire. I had enough through seminary. And people think, well, he's down and out because of these things. And even down and out because he's not married. But that's not necessarily the case. It can be other little things. But they are things like that will pop up. And we'll go to the Gideon thing tomorrow night. I go and I'll be the only one sitting there. By myself, probably. And I just have to deal with it and grin. I say, well, for one time, y'all got to get married. I'm just kidding. But, and I like to pick. And I tell you, the guys that never bother me about not being married are the ones that got good marriages. The ones that will hound me about it, pick at me, do not have good marriages. I found that out. If they never say anything and may kid a little bit, but if they're always making a big deal out of it, then they're not happy. I don't know how long it took me to figure that out, but I did. And but they also think, along with that before we go, they also think, and I'm sharing with me and you to learn you about things that can you imagine if I'd have been in a church and they'd heard all this? They never would have ordained me. I'm just kidding. See, people, without going overboard, need to share. And that's what I'm using as an example. Oh, I never would do that. I never would say that. I never would try to sing because I can. I never would try to teach because I can. Or I never would tell that about what happened with me. Well, some things you might not need to tell. But some things might be a help to some others. And you might be selfish and stubborn in not sharing those things when it might. Because Titus had said, oh, that's fine. They're all right with me. They don't need me. The Lord sent him, and he went. And he was obedient. But, yeah, there's things, I guarantee you, that I can't talk about. And you can't talk about either. But, oh, yeah, it gets me, especially, never mind. I won't say that. This good-looking lady one time come up to me. Oh, my goodness. I knew her. I can't even think what her name was. And I'm a preacher, so she said, you got to be, thought you was making fun of you and everything. she said, well, I'll be honest with you. If I was single, I wouldn't go out with you. I said, well, if I was married, I wouldn't go out with you. And kind of looked at me like, what? Oh, Lord. But anyway, oh gosh, oh my goodness, and I'd go to churches, y'all, back when I had a life, a social life, and the first thing they want to do, oh God, I know this, I got this relative, I got this cousin, she's been living in the basement for 62 years. She needs to get out more, and she ain't dated none, and oh Lord, I'm wanting to find a table to crawl under. So I didn't, and I go to revivals, I go to churches, I heard that preacher without a wife, and every single woman back in the day, until they got to know me, would look back there and say, oh gosh, please don't do this. Oh, he's looking for a wife. He's looking for somebody. He's looking to get married. He's a preacher. He needs it. And I'm saying, aren't you supposed to be preaching a revival, you doofus, instead of talking about me for 30 minutes? So I'm just sharing some of my craziness that people don't hear. And I have shared that before. I went up one time to the pastor when I was just at the church. I was preaching in between churches. And it was something, I wasn't going to get up there and talk bad or nothing. It was just something I needed to share about, so I can't remember what it was. Oh yeah, I hadn't been pastoring a while, and I couldn't find a place, and I was very discouraged, and I was going to ask him to pray for me. Well, I went up to the pastor, and I said, can I have just a minute or two? I just want, Keith, I really don't want to upset things right now. I really don't want you to say anything. We've got it doing pretty good here, and let's just kind of leave it on the surface. And I said, okay. Walk back. That's just an example of, I wasn't going to get up there and talk for 10 minutes. I was just going to say, would y'all pray for me that God would open the door or something? Just being able to get it out and to share. And then the guy proceeded to ask me the next day, I wonder why you ain't got nothing. You must be living in sin or something. Man, I can't win. But you're cheating yourself when you don't. I'm going to talk to the Lord about it. And there's times I'm walking in the woods and I'm throwing rocks. And I'm hitting the wood or getting upset or getting aggravated. And I'm just telling the Lord honestly and sharing my heart with him about things. And I can tell you that it's not always pretty. It's not, oh great God in heaven, how art thou? I'm going through this, and I'm not facing nothing. And the Lord wants to say, yes you are. But it's good to tell it to Jesus, isn't it? But sometimes telling it to other people really, and I made a statement one time before that you might think that thing they're going through compared to what you is nothing, but it very well could be. It very well could be a thing. And we were sitting there one time, and my mom and daddy, there's always been easygoingness. And they was talking about, how did you meet your wife? And these men, oh, we just met at the prom, or we met, and got to daddy. I knew something was coming, even as a teenager. James, how did you and Peggy meet? Well, I got her out of jail twice. And people just sat there like, do what? And that's just the way we were. Actually, it was 3 times he got out of jail, not twice. And it wouldn't. And my mama finally just said, well, I just finally blushed so much, I finally got used to it. But she fit in to that family well. But I tell you one thing with our family, people came from everywhere to see what kind of foolish. We couldn't get enough. We couldn't fit people in to get-togethers or meals because they was always wanting to find out what they gonna do next. But yet we had other family members that was very stoic and professional, and nobody wanted to go to their get-togethers. Nobody wanted to be there. Sometimes we would pull stunts just to entertain the crowd. Spiritually speaking, maybe you being honest with somebody might help them more than it helps you. And say, if you go up to somebody and say, I'm going to ask you something, so-and-so, out and telling you gloom and doom story, but I remember one thing, more than one thing the psalmist David said that I really appreciate. He said, I murmur and complain, and the Lord hears me. Now, nobody else might not, but the Lord does. And we have times where you think it's the most discouraging. We poured our heart out to each other. We're drained. And then 2 days later, they say, I won't tell you how much that meeting meant to me. How much when we got together with us, just a few people, that meant a lot to me. That made the difference. Because I have had an experience or two where we didn't. And those people are no longer with us. Those people took their life on occasion or two. And they were even warned to go talk to that individual. And that has reminded me through what we face. You don't never know. But the Lord we're overcomers through Him that loved us. But we still wear a robe of flesh. And people would ask me straight up questions. And I appreciate it. And one guy asked me one time, he said, are you suicidal? I said, no. I said, now I'm not going to ever say how weak the flesh is, but that's not the depression. It's because of other things. I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of how I'm going to die. But I left there thinking, well, he was really spiritually bold to ask me that question. Now, I did not turn back around and say, Jason, or whatever his name was. Anyway, don't matter. Tom, whatever. Are you depressed? I didn't ask him. He came through it, his particular person did. But later on, he said, I was wanting somebody to ask me that question. And nobody ever did. So, anyway, that's a subject that we should have dealt with more, and the church should have dealt with more. And not just that subject, but other subjects as well. It'll help you. It'll help you. It gets you through some times through the Lord. The Lord's got a sense of humor, and laughter is a good medicine. And sometimes just getting together and unwinding and laughing will make you forget what you was going through until the next morning. But heaven's going to be wonderful. We're not going to have any of these problems and difficulties anymore. Father, we thank you for your word. Lord, again, drink me when I do this, but just sharing with others, I know they don't have the difficulties I do, I'm sure, but I know we do have problems, we have troubles, and we just want to thank you and praise you for your grace and your love and your mercy. Thank you for those that were blessed and fortunate more than we could ever deserve. In Jesus' name, amen. Famous song by Mylon Lefebvre wrote that song. You can check it in the hymn book. Without me, let's stand.
Grace.